When a mafia boss's wife finally breaks her silence, she doesn't just leave. She declares war. Damien Wolf built an empire on fear and control. For 3 years, his wife Nora endured his lies, his cruelty, and his betrayals. But on the night he expected her submission, she handed him divorce papers instead. What Damien didn't know was that Nora had been planning her escape for months, and she knew every one of his secrets. This is the story of a woman who refused to be destroyed by a monster. If you love stories about power, revenge, and survival, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The penthouse was silent when Damien Wolf stepped through the door. It was the kind of silence that preceded storms, heavy, expectant, alive with something unseen. He paused in the marble foyer, his hand still on the handle, and listened. No television murmuring from the living room, no running water from the bathroom, no soft footsteps of his wife padding toward him with that carefully neutral expression she'd perfected over the past year. Just silence. Damien's jaw tightened as he closed the door behind him. The sound echoed through the vast space like a gunshot. He'd been gone for 2 days. 2 days handling the Marcus situation, which had required his personal attention and left 3 bodies in a warehouse on the industrial side of the city. He was exhausted, blood-spattered suit already bagged and disposed of, but his mind was still running hot with adrenaline and the particular satisfaction that came from eliminating a problem permanently. He'd expected Nora to be asleep, or pretending to be asleep, which was more likely. She'd gotten good at that, the art of seeming unconscious while he knew damn well she was lying there, rigid as a corpse, waiting for him to finish whatever he'd come home to do and leave her alone. But this silence was different. Damien moved through the foyer, his expensive shoes making no sound on the heated marble floors. The penthouse stretched before him in shadows and amber light from the city below. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the far wall, offering a view of the skyline that had cost him $8 million and several strategic murders. Everything in this space screamed wealth and power, from the Italian leather furniture to the original Rothko on the wall to the hand-carved mahogany bar that had been shipped piece by piece from a demolished English manor. He'd built this empire from nothing, from the gutters of South Brooklyn, where he'd grown up with rats and roaches and a father whose greatest accomplishment was drinking himself to death before his 40th birthday. Damien had clawed his way up through blood and betrayal, through strategic alliances and brutal eliminations, until he stood at the top of the food chain, untouchable, unstoppable. And Nora, sweet, quiet, pregnant Nora, was just another piece of that empire. A beautiful piece, certainly. The kind of wife that looked perfect on his arm at charity galas and business dinners. The daughter of a respected family, educated, refined, exactly the type of woman a man in his position needed to complete the picture. She knew what he was. She'd known before they married, though perhaps not the full extent of it. And she'd accepted it because she'd had no real choice. Her family's debts had seen to that. Damien had offered a solution. Marriage, financial security, protection. All she had to do was play the part. For 3 years, she'd done exactly that. But lately, something had shifted. Damien couldn't quite put his finger on it. She was still obedient, still quiet, still performed her duties as his wife with that same careful neutrality. But there was something in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. A distance. A coldness that made him think of deep water and things that lived in the dark. He told himself it was the pregnancy. Women got emotional when they were carrying, hormonal, irrational. It would pass once the baby was born, and she had something to focus on besides whatever imaginary grievances she'd constructed in that pretty head of hers. The living room was empty. So was the kitchen, though he noticed a single wine glass in the sink, unusual given that she'd stopped drinking the moment she found out she was pregnant. He picked it up, sniffed it. Water. Just water. Something cold moved through his chest. Nora? His voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. The voice that made grown men flinch and fumble for explanations. The voice that had ordered executions and negotiated treaties and built an empire on the bones of anyone stupid enough to challenge him. No answer. Damien moved toward the bedroom, his instincts firing warnings he didn't fully understand. The door was open. The bed was made, perfectly made, hospital corners and all, not a wrinkle in the silk duvet. Nora's side of the closet stood open, and he could see gaps where her clothes had been. Not all of them, but enough. The cold in his chest spread like frost. He turned and strode back toward the living room, moving faster now, his mind cataloging details he'd missed the first time. The family photos that had been on the mantel were gone. The small jade plant she'd kept on the windowsill, gone. The bookmark she'd left in the novel on the side table, gone. And then he saw her. Nora sat in the armchair by the window, perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple black dress, not one of the designer pieces he'd bought her, but something plain and severe that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, revealing the delicate bone structure that had first caught his attention 4 years ago. She'd been 23 then, working as a gallery assistant, barely making rent on a studio apartment in Queens. Now she was 27 and 5 months pregnant with his child, and she was looking at him like she'd never seen him before. Jesus Christ, Damien breathed, pressing a hand to his chest in mock alarm. You scared the shit out of me. What are you doing sitting in the dark like some kind of... He stopped. On the table beside her, illuminated by the city lights filtering through the window, sat a stack of papers. Legal-sized, official-looking, and resting on top of them, catching the light like a tiny beacon, was her wedding ring. Damien stared at the ring, then at the papers, then at his wife's face. She hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, just sat there with her hands folded over the small swell of her belly, watching him with those dark, fathomless eyes. What is this? He asked quietly. Divorce papers, Nora said. Her voice was steady, calm, like she was commenting on the weather. I've already signed them. You just need to add your signature, and we can begin the process of dividing assets and determining custody arrangements. For a long moment, Damien simply stood there, certain he'd misheard, certain this was some kind of joke or a pregnancy hormone-induced breakdown that would resolve itself once he talked her down from whatever ledge she'd climbed onto. Then he started to laugh. It began as a chuckle, low in his chest, and built into genuine laughter that echoed through the penthouse. He laughed until his sides hurt, until tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, until the absurdity of the situation fully crystallized in his mind. Nora Wolfe, his wife, his property, the woman who owed him everything, thought she could divorce him. Oh, sweetheart, he said when he could breathe again, wiping at his eyes. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is really something. Did one of your book club friends put this idea in your head? Tell me it was Sandra. I always knew that woman was trouble. No one put anything in my head, Nora interrupted, her voice cut through his amusement like a scalpel. I'm leaving you, Damien, tonight. I've already moved my essential belongings to a secure location. The rest can be handled through our attorneys. The laughter died in his throat. Damien crossed the room in 3 long strides, his shadow falling over her like a thundercloud. But Nora didn't flinch, didn't shrink back, just kept looking at him with that same unsettling calm. You're not going anywhere, he said softly. You're my wife. You're carrying my child. And you seem to have forgotten what happens to people who try to leave me. I haven't forgotten anything, Nora replied. I know exactly what you are. I know about the warehouse in Red Hook. I know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I know about the 3 city councilmen on your payroll and the federal judge you bought last year. I know about Marcus Delgado and what you did to him 2 nights ago. Damien went very still. I know about Victoria Chen, Nora continued, her voice never wavering. The woman you've been keeping in an apartment in Tribeca for the past 18 months. I know about the others before her. I know about the child you fathered with your attorney's wife 6 years ago, the one you pay her to keep quiet about. I know everything, Damien, every lie, every murder, every betrayal. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Damien smiled. It was the smile that usually preceded violence, the one that made his enemies start bargaining for their lives. You think you can threaten me? He asked, his voice dropping into a register that most people only heard once before they stopped hearing anything at all. You think you can walk into my home, my penthouse, and blackmail me with information you have no way of proving? I'm not threatening you, Nora said. I'm divorcing you. There's a difference. There's no difference, Damien snarled. You're mine, Nora. You were mine the moment I paid off your family's debts. You were mine when you walked down that aisle. You're mine now, and you'll be mine until I decide otherwise. Do you understand me? No. The word hung in the air between them. Damien's hand shot out and gripped the arm of her chair, his knuckles white. "What did you just say to me?" "I said no," Nora repeated. "I don't belong to you, Damien. I never did. And I'm done pretending otherwise." He wanted to hit her. The urge was so strong it made his muscles twitch. He'd never hit her before, had never needed to, because she'd always been so perfectly obedient, so carefully managed. But right now, looking at the defiance in her eyes, he wanted to teach her exactly what happened to people who defied Damien Wolf. His hand was halfway to her face when a voice spoke from the shadows behind him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Damien spun around, his other hand instinctively reaching for the gun he kept in his shoulder holster. But he froze when he saw the man standing in the doorway to the study. James fucking Castellano. He was older than Damien by 15 years, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his mouth and eyes. But there was nothing soft about him. James Castellano was old school mafia, the kind who'd built his empire back when the families still controlled the city, before the Russians and the Albanians and the cartels had started carving up territory. He was semi-retired now, or so everyone said, content to live off his investments and the fear he'd cultivated over 4 decades of brutal efficiency. And he was standing in Damien's penthouse like he owned the place. "What the hell are you doing here?" Damien demanded. James smiled slightly. "Nora invited me." "Nora invited?" Damien whirled back to his wife, fury building in his chest like a bonfire. "You brought James Castellano into our home?" "I brought a witness," Nora corrected. "Someone who can verify that I made this offer in good faith and that you responded with threats of violence." "A witness," Damien repeated slowly. He looked between them, his wife sitting perfectly still in her chair, her hands folded over their child. James Castellano standing in the shadows like an undertaker at a funeral, and something clicked into place in his mind. "You think he can protect you?" Damien asked, his voice rising. "You think because you've got James fucking Castellano standing in my living room that somehow changes the equation? That I won't destroy you both?" "James isn't here to protect me," Nora said quietly. "He's here to make sure you understand something important." "And what's that?" Nora stood up slowly, one hand supporting her belly. She moved to the window and looked out at the city sprawling below them. Millions of lights, millions of lives, all of them unaware that in this penthouse, on this night, something was ending. "You've spent 3 years trying to break me," she said softly. "Controlling where I go, who I see, what I wear, monitoring my phone calls and emails, isolating me from my friends and family, making sure I understood that I was nothing without you, that I had no power, no choices, no future, except the one you designed for me." She turned to face him, and for the first time Damien saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. It was pity. "You spent so much time making sure I was afraid of you," Nora continued, "that you never stopped to consider what I might become if I stopped being afraid." "This is ridiculous," Damien snapped. He grabbed the divorce papers off the table and tore them in half, then in quarters, then let the pieces fall to the floor like confetti. "You're not divorcing me, Nora. You're not leaving, and you're sure as hell not taking my child anywhere. This little episode ends now. Mr. Castellano, I appreciate you taking an interest in my domestic affairs, but I think it's time for you to leave." James didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. "Not until Nora is safely relocated to her new residence." "Her new—" Damien laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. "You really think you can waltz in here and take my wife away from me? You think I'm just going to let that happen?" "I think," James said carefully, "that you're going to sit down and think very carefully about your next move. Because the moment you touch her, the moment you make any move against her, the information she's compiled about your operations goes directly to the FBI, the DEA, and the New York State Attorney General's office." Damien froze. "Bluff," he said flatly. "It's not a bluff," Nora said. She reached into her purse, a small black clutch Damien had never seen before, and pulled out a USB drive. "Everything's on here. Financial records, recordings of your conversations with associates, photographs, witness statements. I've been documenting everything for 14 months, Damien, ever since I found out I was pregnant and realized I needed to get our child away from you." The world seemed to tilt sideways. 14 months. She'd been planning this for 14 months, while she'd smiled at him across the dinner table, while she'd attended his business functions and played the perfect wife, while she'd let him touch her, kiss her, while she'd conceived his child. She'd been building a case against him. "You're lying," Damien said, but his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. Nora walked toward him, her steps slow and deliberate. When she was close enough that he could smell her perfume, the jasmine scent he'd bought her for their first anniversary, she held out the USB drive. "I don't want to destroy you," she said quietly. "I just want to be free. Sign the divorce papers, agree to reasonable custody arrangements, and this drive goes into a safety deposit box where it stays unless something happens to me or our child. Refuse, and everything goes public tomorrow morning." Damien stared at the small plastic device in her hand. Such a tiny thing to contain so much destruction. "You won't do it," he said. "If you release that information, you implicate yourself. You've been living off my money, benefiting from my business. They'll come after you too." "I've thought of that," Nora said. "I've already spoken with an attorney who specializes in spousal immunity and witness protection. I've documented every instance where you threatened me, controlled me, isolated me. There's a legal term for it, coercive control. It's a form of domestic abuse, Damien, and it's going to be very easy to prove." The room spun. Damien reached out to steady himself against the back of the sofa, his mind racing through possibilities and outcomes, calculating odds the way he'd been trained to do since he was 16 years old and first started running numbers for the Moretti family. Every scenario ended the same way, with him in prison or dead. "You're making a mistake," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea what you're starting." "I'm not starting anything," Nora replied. "I'm ending it. The only question is whether you're going to let it end quietly or if you're going to force this to become ugly." She set the USB drive on the table beside her wedding ring. The two objects sat there side by side, one a symbol of the life she was leaving behind, the other a weapon that could destroy everything he'd built. "I'm staying at a secure location tonight," Nora said. "My attorney will contact you tomorrow to begin the formal process. You have 48 hours to decide whether you're going to cooperate or if I'm going to the federal prosecutor." She picked up her purse and moved toward the door where James Castellano waited, but Damien's voice stopped her. "I'll find you," he said softly. "Wherever you're going, whatever hole you think you can hide in, I'll find you. And when I do, you're going to wish you'd never tried this." Nora paused in the doorway. For a moment, she looked back at him, and Damien saw something in her expression that chilled him to his core. It was the same look he'd seen in the mirror 1,000 times. The look of someone who'd calculated all the angles, considered all the possibilities, and decided that victory was worth any price. "You taught me something important, Damien," she said quietly. "You taught me that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who has nothing left to lose. I don't have anything left to lose. You took it all. My family, my friends, my freedom, my dignity. The only thing I have left is our child, and I will burn your entire empire to the ground before I let you turn our baby into another one of your possessions." She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture that was both protective and defiant. "Come after me if you want," Nora continued. "Threaten me, follow me, try to intimidate me back into submission. But understand this. The real danger in this room has never been you. It's always been what you made me become." Then she was gone, James Castellano's hand on her elbow as he guided her into the private elevator that served the penthouse. The doors closed with a soft chime, and Damien was alone with the ruins of his carefully constructed world. He stood there for a long time, staring at the elevator doors. Then he looked down at the torn divorce papers scattered across his marble floor, at the USB drive and wedding ring sitting on the table like evidence at a crime scene. A sound escaped his throat, something between a laugh and a snarl. Did she really think she could threaten him? Did she really believe that 14 months of gathering information and making plans was enough to bring down Damien Wolf? He'd survived gang wars and federal investigations. He'd outlasted rivals who'd tried to take his territory and associates who'd tried to take his life. He'd built an empire through sheer will and ruthless efficiency, and no one, not the FBI, not rival families, and certainly not his own wife, was going to take it away from him. Damien pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Vincent," he said when the line picked up. "We have a problem. I I need you to find someone for me. And when you find her, I want you to make sure she understands the consequences of betraying me." He listened to the response, his eyes never leaving the elevator doors. "I don't care where she is or who's protecting her," he said softly. "I want her brought back here tonight, alive and undamaged. I'm not a monster, but I want her to know that she's made the biggest mistake of her life." He ended the call and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had been his kingdom for 15 years. Somewhere out there, Nora was thinking she'd won, thinking she'd outsmarted him, thinking she could just walk away and start a new life with his child. She had no idea what was coming, because Damian Wolf didn't lose, he didn't accept defeat, and he certainly didn't let his possessions decide when they were done belonging to him. The game was just beginning, and by the time it was over, Nora would understand that freedom was an illusion he'd allowed her to believe in, that the cage had never been the penthouse or the marriage or the careful control he'd exerted over every aspect of her life. The cage was him, and there was no escape from Damian Wolf, not ever. What Damian didn't know, what he couldn't have known as he stood there planning his wife's recapture and punishment, was that Nora Ellison had been preparing for this moment longer than 14 months. She'd been preparing for it since the night of their wedding, when she'd watched him take a phone call in the middle of their first dance and understood exactly what kind of man she'd married. She'd been preparing for it through every threat, every manipulation, every carefully calculated moment of cruelty disguised as affection. And she'd been preparing for it since the day she found the file her mother had hidden, the file that explained why Catherine Ellison had died in a car accident that wasn't an accident at all, and why Nora's entire life had been a carefully constructed lie designed to protect a secret that powerful men would kill to possess. In the car speeding away from the penthouse, Nora allowed herself one moment of weakness. Her hand shook slightly as she pulled out her phone and sent a single text message to a number Damian didn't know existed. "It's done." He took the bait. The response came 30 seconds later. "Good. Phase 2 begins now. Get some rest. You're going to need it." Nora deleted both messages and powered down the phone. Then she looked out at the city lights streaming past and thought about the child growing inside her. A child who would never know the monster its father was, who would never be used as a pawn in Damian Wolf's endless games of power and control. She thought about her mother, who had died protecting her from a truth she was only now beginning to understand. And she thought about the man who was coming, the man Damian didn't know about, the one who'd been watching and waiting for exactly this moment. Her biological father, the nightmare that made Damian Wolf look like a fairy tale villain. Nora closed her eyes and felt the weight of what was coming settle over her like a shroud. She told Damian that she had nothing left to lose, and that was true. What she hadn't told him was that she had something far more dangerous than nothing. She had a purpose, and she would see it through to the end, no matter what it cost her. The car merged onto the highway, carrying her away from the penthouse and toward a future that terrified her more than anything Damian could do, because she knew something he didn't. The real danger wasn't behind her, it was ahead, and it was coming for them both. The safe house was nothing like Nora had imagined. She'd pictured something sterile and institutional, blank walls, uncomfortable furniture, the kind of place designed for function rather than comfort. Instead, James Castellano led her into a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights with crown molding and hardwood floors, original fireplaces and windows that looked out onto tree-lined streets where normal people lived normal lives. "It belonged to my daughter," James said, watching Nora take in the space. "Before she moved to California, I keep it maintained for situations like this." "Situations like this," Nora repeated softly. She set her bag down on the vintage sofa and wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly exhausted. "How many wives have you helped escape from men like Damian?" "Enough," James said. He moved to the kitchen and began making tea without asking if she wanted any. "You should rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult." But Nora couldn't rest. Her mind was racing, replaying the confrontation in the penthouse, analyzing every word, every gesture, looking for mistakes she might have made. Damian's face when he'd seen the divorce papers, that moment of genuine shock before the fury set in, played on repeat behind her eyes. "He's going to come after me," she said. "I know." James returned with 2 cups of chamomile tea and handed her one. "That's why we're moving you again tomorrow. This is just temporary until we can finalize the more permanent arrangement." Nora's hand trembled slightly as she took the cup. The baby shifted inside her, a flutter of movement that reminded her why she'd done this, why she'd risked everything. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping me. You didn't have to." James settled into the armchair across from her, his weathered face unreadable. "Your mother was a good woman," he said after a moment. "She deserved better than what happened to her." Nora's breath caught. "You knew my mother?" "Everyone in certain circles knew Catherine Ellison," James replied. "She was brilliant, worked as a financial analyst for some of the biggest firms in the city. She had a gift for seeing patterns, understanding how money moved through systems. It made her very valuable to people who needed that kind of expertise." "And very dangerous," Nora added. James nodded slowly. Catherine knew things about accounts and transfers and offshore holdings that powerful men wanted to keep hidden. When she tried to walk away from that world, when she tried to protect you from it, they killed her, Nora finished. "I found the file she left, the one hidden in the safety deposit box. It took me 3 years to find it, but I did." "What did it tell you?" Nora set down her tea and pulled out her phone. Despite having powered it down in the car, she'd turned it back on once they arrived at the safe house. A calculated risk, but one she needed to take. She opened a photo and handed the phone to James. He studied the image for a long moment, his expression growing darker. "Where did you get this?" "From my mother's safety deposit box, along with letters, account numbers, and a name I'd never heard before." Nora paused. "Richard Castellano." James went very still. "Your brother," Nora continued, "the one who supposedly died in a boating accident 28 years ago." "He's not dead," James said flatly. He handed back the phone, his hand steady despite the tension in his jaw. "Is that what Catherine's file told you? That Richard is alive?" "It told me more than that." Nora pulled up another image. A birth certificate this time. Her birth certificate. "It told me that Richard Castellano is my biological father." The silence that followed was absolute. James stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to her. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring out at the quiet street below. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Catherine never told me," he said. "All these years I never knew." "She was protecting me," Nora said. "From him. From what he was." The file explained everything. How she met him, how he convinced her to help him hide money from his own family, how he promised to leave the life for her, and then how he changed his mind. "Richard never changed his mind about anything," James said bitterly. "Once he decided what he wanted, he took it, no matter who got hurt in the process. My mother found out she was pregnant and tried to leave. He threatened her, told her he'd take the baby, raise it in his world. So she went to his enemies and made a deal." James turned to face her. "What kind of deal?" "Information for protection. She gave them everything she knew about Richard's operations in exchange for a new identity and enough money to disappear. But Richard found out before she could run. That's when he staged his own death. Made it look like he'd gone down with his boat off the coast of Maine. Everyone thought he was dead, including you." "But he wasn't," James said. "No, he was in South America building a new empire with the money my mother had helped him hide. And when she tried to expose him years later, when she tried to make sure I'd never be found—" "The car accident," James finished. Nora nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes for the first time in months. She was driving home from the lawyer's office. She'd just updated her will, left instructions for me to access the safety deposit box when I turned 25. The brakes failed on a mountain road. The investigators ruled it mechanical failure, but the file had photos. Someone had cut the brake line. "And you think Richard ordered it?" "I know he did. Because 6 months after she died, someone approached my uncle about my family's debts, offered to clear them all in exchange for an introduction to me. That someone was acting on behalf of Damien Wolfe." James closed his eyes. "Richard sent Damien to find you. Not just find me, marry me, control me. Keep me close until Richard was ready to reveal himself and claim what he thinks belongs to him." Nora stood up, pacing to the fireplace. "My mother protected something, James, something worth killing for, and whatever it is, both Damien and Richard want it." "Do you know what it is?" "No, but I think Damien is going to try to force it out of me." She turned to face him. "That's why I had to leave tonight. Not because I wanted to divorce him, though that's true enough, but because I needed to draw him out. Make him desperate enough to show his hand before Richard makes his move. James studied her for a long moment. You're using yourself as bait. I'm using myself as a catalyst, Nora corrected, to force a confrontation between two men who've been circling each other for years. Damien doesn't know about Richard. He thinks he's the apex predator in this situation. But Richard's been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And I'm going to make sure that when he does, I'm ready. Ready for what? To destroy them both. The words hung in the air between them, stark and uncompromising. James looked at her with something like respect mixed with concern. You sound like your mother, he said quietly. Catherine had that same steel in her spine, that same willingness to burn the world down to protect what mattered. Then you understand why I'm doing this. I understand why you think you need to do this, James replied. But you're 5 months pregnant and going up against two of the most dangerous men in the criminal underworld. You need to think about your child. I am thinking about my child, Nora said fiercely. Every decision I've made has been about protecting this baby from the monsters who want to use it as leverage. I won't let my son or daughter grow up the way I did, with secrets and lies and the constant threat of violence hanging overhead. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down and her blood ran cold. Unknown number. But the message was clear enough. You made a mistake tonight, Nora. Come home and we can fix this. Stay away and I'll make you regret it for the rest of your very short life. James saw her expression and held out his hand. She passed him the phone and watched his jaw tighten as he read the message. He's already moving, James said, faster than I expected. What do we do? Before James could answer, headlights swept across the windows. A car had pulled up outside, a black sedan with tinted windows. Not Damien's usual vehicle, but the type of car his people drove. Upstairs, James said quietly. Now. Nora didn't argue. She grabbed her bag and moved quickly up the stairs, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard James make a phone call, his voice low and urgent. From the second-floor bedroom, Nora watched as two men emerged from the sedan. They weren't Damien's usual enforcers. She'd memorized the faces of everyone in his inner circle over the past 3 years. These were new players. One of them approached the front door while the other stayed by the car, scanning the street with the practiced vigilance of someone expecting trouble. The doorbell rang. Nora held her breath, every muscle in her body tense. Through the floor, she could hear James moving toward the door, his footsteps measured and calm. The door opened. Can I help you, gentlemen? James's voice carried up the stairs. We're looking for someone, an unfamiliar voice replied. Woman, late 20s, pregnant. She might have come this way. A lot of pregnant women in Brooklyn, James said mildly. You got a name? Nora Wolf. Her husband's very concerned about her well-being. Seems she walked out on him tonight without any explanation. He just wants to make sure she's safe. I'm sure he does. Unfortunately, I haven't seen anyone matching that description. There was a pause, then, Mr. Castellano, we know you helped her leave the penthouse tonight. We have witnesses who saw you leave with her in your car. Now, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, we're not leaving without her. Nora's hands clenched into fists. She looked around the bedroom for anything she could use as a weapon, but there was nothing except decorative pillows and a reading lamp. The easy way would be for you to get back in your car and report to Damien Wolf that you couldn't find her, James said. His voice had taken on an edge now, the pleasant veneer dropping away to reveal the steel underneath. The hard way would be for you to try to force your way into my home and discover why that would be a very bad idea. We have our orders, and I have mine, James interrupted. I'm going to count to 10. If you're still on my doorstep when I reach 10, I'm going to assume you're hostile threats that need to be eliminated. 1. Nora heard the sound of safeties being clicked off. Multiple weapons. 2. Mr. Castellano, we don't want trouble. 3. Movement outside. Nora risked a glance out the window and saw the second man reaching into the sedan, pulling out something long and dark. A rifle. 4. You're making a mistake, one of the men said. Mr. Wolf isn't going to forget this. 5, 6, 7. The men backed away from the door, but they didn't leave. Instead, they retreated to their car and took up positions behind it, weapons drawn. James closed the door and locked it. A moment later, he was